Right. Welcome, everybody. We have a Deidre Vars here, who is a realtor broker in North Carolina. She actually sold me my home when I moved here. And we are going to talk a little bit today about the process of selling or buying a home. So thank you so much for joining us, Deidre.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So if we can just start, can you tell us, let's say somebody comes to you and says, I want to sell my house. What is the first step that you do?
Well, the first step is North Carolina is an agency state, so we must instruct the consumer about agency, which means that as an agent, I can represent the seller or the buyer or both people as a dual agent in the transaction. And the reason that is important, because once you enter into a contractual agreement for services, such as the right to list their home, we need to define what kind of relationship we have. For example, if I am a exclusive listing agent, then I have a fiduciary responsibility to them to make sure everything's kept confidential.
Oh, okay. So the first thing you do is kind of negotiate the terms of your agency with the seller.
Correct.
Okay. And you enter then into a contract with the seller to represent them in the sale process?
Correct. We enter, it's called an exclusive listing agreement. It's with the firm that I work for as an independent contractor, and I am considered the agent in the transaction that represents or is responsible to the seller.
Okay, so you exclusively represent the seller in the sale of that real property, right? And it's specific to that real property usually. Is that correct?
Yes, it's specific to the address of the property. It has in it the terms such as commission, terms as how we advertise the property, terms on, if there's personal property they don't want to convey, or like if they want their refrigerator to stay or whatever, those kind of things.
Okay, so you define the property pretty well. You say not only the address of the property, do you include a property description at this point? Or do you just say commonly referred to as, does it depend?
Well, right now, when you enter into an exclusive listing agreement, you have to have the legal description, the deed, the plat. We put the PIN number for real estate tax, all those items, so that it does definitely drill down to that one property.
So we have talked about property descriptions or legal descriptions. We even went over a case where it turned out the property description on the deed was to the adjacent land, and everybody lived in a house that was on land adjacent to what was described in the deed. And so this was an issue with everybody in the subdivision. So can you talk, but I don't think we really talked about what a property description is. Where do you find it? What is the purpose of it?
Well, when I'm getting ready to list a home, or even when I'm entertaining a buyer and taking them, you want to make sure that the property that you're getting ready to sell or buy is the correct property. So you need to pull the deed, you need to pull the tax card. I always pull the plat as well to cross-reference the legal description. Most of the time, the legal description has the neighborhood, it'll have the phase of when it was built, and it'll also have usually the plat that it's located on, or the land number.
Okay, so it'll have the land number. And so then you check to see if the house is actually built on the land that it says it's built on?
Yes.
That's probably a bigger step, honestly, than most realtors do. So I got to give you kudos for that. Some realtors don't even do that, but that's an excellent. Yeah. So you wouldn't have a situation where you sold somebody a house that's sitting on land that is not described in the deed.
No, because we would get that corrected by a quick claim or something like that before we listed the property to make sure it's all right.
And you find it out right away. Okay, very cool. So you get the property description, and so you know what you're selling. The sellers know what they're selling, and then you talk about personal property that might be in the house or fixtures. So can you tell us a little bit about what fixtures are and where they sit as far as being personal property or real property?
The list of fixtures has grown over time. It gets bigger every year. For example, TV mounts. That didn't used to be listed in the contract as a fixture, but it is now, because if it's in the home mounted to the wall, it considers it's going to stay with the home. So the seller cannot take it off the wall. Basically, I tell my clients, anything that's in the house, if you don't want to sell it, if you have a favorite light fixture, you need to change it out before we list it. Because a lot of times if someone sees it in the property, even though you exclude it in the contract, they still think that they're getting it. So it avoids any of the problems of, I wanted that lamp that was, or that chandelier that was in the, the foyer.
So basically real property includes anything that is affixed to the house or to the land.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So that can be chandeliers. That could even be, like you said, a mount for a TV.
Built-in shelving. If they've done like a TV thing that's built into the wall, that stays. Bars that are built in, those kind of things.
Okay, so that would be considered real property. All right, so you have agreed, they have signed the contract. Then what's the next step?
Well, once you get a listing agreement, in our agreement, we define the marketing date. We also have the ability in North Carolina to do a coming soon. That's where we have 21 days to have the property assigned in the yard with coming soon. And but we can't advertise it publicly. Agents only see it. So it gives you some extra ad time. Then once you have a marketing date, that's the effective date. It goes live in the MLS. And that's when you can have showings on the property.
What is the MLS for people who don't know?
It's a multiple listing service. We have one right here in the Triad. It covers High Point, Winston, all the Triad, basically all the way to Burlington. So basically as an agent, we have access. We pay fees in order to have that information, and we enter in the listing with all the measurements and all those things, so that the public and or an agent can see what is the particulars about the property.
Okay, great. So it's like a computerized system that has all the info about the sale, what the purchase price is, all of that, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say the house gets shown and you get an offer immediately from a prospective buyer. How does that work?
Well, when we get an offer, I make sure that they have also included a pre-qualification, so that I know that the buyer can actually purchase the property. I go through the offer and I pick out the points that are relevant to discuss with my client, and then we go over those terms. Because it's not only purchase price, it's due diligence monies, it's earnest monies, it's do they want closing costs, do they want a home warranty, et cetera, et cetera. So
there's more than just the purchase price that goes into it. Part of it is the financing. So you said a pre-qualification letter. You want to make sure the buyer has that from a lender so that they know, the seller knows that they have been approved. The buyer has been approved for a loan. And there are some, as you said, some due diligence money, some escrow money. That's called different things in different states. But in North Carolina, there's a due diligence period. And great. So let's say that they agree on all those terms with the seller, and they accept the buyer and seller come to an agreement, and the seller accepts the offer. What next?
Well, that's when the due diligence period starts for the buyer, and that would have been determined in the contract how long that lasts. And during that time, the buyer and their agent will order the inspections they want to do. Pest, radon, regular home. If it's got well and septic, those need to be included. So that time period is for them to look to see what is, in their opinion, needs to be repaired for the home. Once they get all that back, they come back to me, the listing agent, and give me a due diligence request form, which ask for what they want repaired. North Carolina is a buyer beware state, so seller is not required to make any repairs. But most of the time, it's if they're reasonable, sellers will usually agree.
If at this point the seller decides I don't want to fix that, and the buyer decides, okay, well, if you're not going to fix that, I don't want the property, can they walk away at this point? Has anything been conveyed?
They can walk away, but they lose their due diligence money. So whatever that was agreed upon in the contract, if we're still in the due diligence period, they can walk away, and the seller keeps the due diligence monies.
Okay, good. So basically, in essence, the due diligence money is the amount that the buyer pays to take the property off of the market while they decide if they want to go through with the purchase. Is that kind of a way to describe it?
Correct. I always phrase it as the buyer is kind of renting the property for that 3 to 4 weeks while they do their inspection.
Okay, but title has not conveyed. Okay, so let's say they come to an agreement or there are no repairs. And so we have gone through the due diligence period. Due diligence period is over. Then what happens?
Well, right then is where you're looking for the clear to close on the buyer's loan. From a selling standpoint, we're just kind of in a waiting period.
So let's say the buyer has cash and we don't have to deal with the financing of a loan, right? Then what happens at this point?
We can go to closing. We just get the closing disclosure. We use a HUD here in North Carolina for cash transactions. The attorney does the documents, we go sign everything, and once the deed is recorded, the title conveys from the seller to the buyer.
So you go to closing, and what is occurring at closing? What is the transaction?
It's technically called settlement because it's really what you're doing is settling the debits and the credits for both the buyer and the seller. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at what the purchase price was. The the buyer gets credit for due diligence and any earnest or escrow monies. And then any other charges, say for expenses or whatever, they are debited and credited. And at the end, you come down with a settlement line that says, seller receives this much money and buyer needs to bring this much money to close to actually purchase the property.
Okay, and then so at that time they're figuring out how much money is owed after all the credits and all of that, and then the buyer is giving the check, or in North Carolina probably cash, because they don't take checks here, but in other states it would be a physical check.
Cashier's check.
Cashier's check. They're giving the I learned that the hard way. They're giving the cashier's check to the seller. The seller is then signing away the property, right? So they are then conveying the deed physically, sometimes even, right? They sign away the deed, and the deed is drawn up in the name of the buyer, and then that's not enough in North Carolina, right? For just because the deed has been conveyed, it's not until the deed is recorded at the recorder's office, which is an actual county office. You either do electronically or you walk in and you record the deed. And it's at the time that the deed is recorded, that's when the buyer officially owns the property. Is that right?
Correct, because North Carolina is an attorney state. We don't use title companies, so the attorney actually mitigates everything. They do the collection of the monies, then they pay the seller through their trust accounts, and they also do the recording of the deed. The seller will sign it, and then it has to be recorded.
So I think I will have an attorney come on to explain what they do on that portion of it. Would probably be a good idea. A real estate attorney locally to come in and explain that. Okay.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That was extremely helpful. I know your time is short, so I don't want to keep you on too long, but thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that.
And if anybody has any questions, tell them to feel free to reach out.
All right. I will put your email address on the video so that they can reach out to you.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Talib.
Thank you.